On August 11, 2023, 18-year-old Brooklyn Sims was gunned down while working her shift at a Home Depot in Pensacola, Florida. Multiple shots fired. No warning. No time to react. When police arrived, they found Brooklyn's lifeless body lying on the floor. But what stunned everyone even more was who pulled the trigger. Witnesses identified the shooter as Keith Agee, the father of Brooklyn's child, a man she once called family. At first, it seemed like an unthinkable act of violence. But as investigators began to dig deeper, they uncovered a trail of messages, plans, and conversations that would change everything. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was calculated, deliberate, and he didn't act alone. The truth behind what happened to Brooklyn Sims would leave an entire community in disbelief. Brooklyn Sims was just 18. But in those short years, she carried more responsibility than most her age. She was a young mother raising a daughter who was still learning to walk. Everything Brooklyn did, every shift she took, every hour she worked was for that little girl. Friends described her as soft-spoken, kind, and mature beyond her years. She didn't go out much. She wasn't caught up in drama. She kept her circle small and her goals clear. Her job at Home Depot wasn't glamorous, but it was a step forward. A way to provide. A place to build something stable. She had dreams. Quiet ones. Maybe to go back to school. Maybe to get her own apartment. To raise her daughter in peace. But Brooklyn's life wasn't always easy. Being a teenage mom came with pressure, especially in a relationship that, according to some who knew her, was already strained. She had been involved with Keith Agee, the man she eventually shared a child with. And while their connection had once looked like love, things had changed. Behind the photos and shared parenting were arguments. Distance. Moments that made those close to Brooklyn uneasy. Still, she pushed forward. Brooklyn showed up for work that day like it was any other. No one, not even her co-workers, could have imagined what would happen just hours later. She never made it home. And in the days that followed, as her face spread across headlines and timelines, people began asking the same question. How could this happen? Brooklyn and Keith Agee weren't strangers thrown together by chance. They had a history. One that started with a relationship, turned into parenthood, and eventually unraveled in ways that few saw coming. At just 18, Brooklyn was already raising a child she shared with Keith. And while their relationship had moments of closeness, it wasn't always stable. Friends and family noted that there were signs, arguments, tension, things left unsaid. Keith was 20 years old. A father, yes, but also someone whose life seemed to be pulled in different directions. Some said he struggled with responsibility. Others noticed a controlling edge when it came to Brooklyn. She didn't talk much about it, but those closest to her sensed there was more going on beneath the surface. At one point they lived in different cities. Brooklyn was in Pensacola working at Home Depot. Keith lived in the nearby town of Pritchard, Alabama, about an hour away. But even with that distance there was still contact. They were co-parenting, still connected at least on paper. But something had shifted. Texts had become arguments. Trust was fading. And Brooklyn, according to a few friends, seemed ready to move on. She was focusing on her daughter, on work, on building her own life. Meanwhile, Keith's behavior was changing. He began sending messages, some filled with jealousy, others hinting at frustration. There were rumors that he was tracking her movements, watching her social media, obsessing over things she said or did. The final turning point came when a private issue became public. A message that would ignite everything. Keith had allegedly learned that he might have contracted an STD and he blamed Brooklyn. That message, that moment, set everything in motion. What followed wasn't a heated confrontation or a painful breakup. It was something far colder. And what no one expected was that Keith wouldn't be acting alone. On August 11, 2023, it was a Friday. Brooklyn clocked in for her shift at the Home Depot on Davis Highway in Pensacola, Florida. It was a regular afternoon, customers walking in, workers restocking shelves, the usual buzz of power tools and price checks in the background. To everyone around her, it was just another workday. But someone else was on their way to that store and he wasn't there to shop. Keith Agee. He had left Alabama and crossed state lines. In his possession? A gun. At 1:30 p.m., Keith walked into the Home Depot. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He went straight toward Brooklyn. Witnesses said there wasn't a fight. No screaming. No argument. Just 7 gunshots. Customers and employees scrambled for cover. Some ran toward the exits. Others froze in place. When the chaos stopped, Brooklyn was lying on the floor. Her orange apron soaked in blood. She had been shot multiple times in the chest and torso. Emergency respondent rushed to the scene. But it was too late. Brooklyn Sim died right there in the store. Keith had already fled. But his escape didn't last long. That same afternoon he was arrested in nearby Theodore, Alabama. And soon after, his mother Cassandra was taken into custody too. Text records, surveillance footage, digital evidence. All of it pointed to a disturbing truth. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. The arrest of Keith Agee and his mother, Cassandra, marked the beginning of a long legal battle that would captivate the community and the public alike. Keith was charged with first-degree murder for the killing of his wife, Brooklyn Sims. The brutal, calculated nature of the crime coupled with the shocking details of the planning and premeditation left little room for any other charge. But the story didn't stop at the arrest. As the case unfolded, investigators worked tirelessly to uncover every detail, every piece of evidence that could explain what led to such a horrific act. Evidence gathered from Keith's phone, the text messages between him and his mother and surveillance footage from the Home Depot painted a chilling picture of a family torn apart by rage and betrayal. What shocked everyone even more was the revelation that Brooklyn Sims had never contracted an STD. In fact, a thorough medical examination and testing revealed that Brooklyn was healthy. The rumors that led to Keith's violent outburst were completely unfounded. The test results from the medical facility confirmed that the STD diagnosis, which had allegedly triggered Keith's jealous rage, was not only false but based on a fake report that Keith himself had manipulated. To make matters worse, further investigation revealed that Keith had himself tested positive for an STD, but the medical report he had used to accuse Brooklyn was a forged document. The truth was that the man who had taken his wife's life had been the one living with the infection, and in his misguided rage, he had blamed Brooklyn for his own failings. Cassandra Agee was also charged not with murder, but with aiding and abetting. She had been involved in some capacity from the very start. Her support of Keith's actions, whether emotional or logistical, made her complicit in the crime. Cassandra's involvement came to light through witness testimony and the discovery of phone records that showed she had been in constant communication with her son, even on the night of the murder. Despite her initial denials, the evidence painted a clear picture of a mother who had, knowingly or not, supported her son's devastating actions. Keith and Cassandra were both sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Their sentences were a stark reminder of how far jealousy, rage, and manipulation can go when unchecked. As the court proceedings concluded, the weight of the tragedy settled heavily on Brooklyn's family. The legal decisions, while offering a sense of justice, could never bring her back. Still, there was some solace in knowing that Keith and Cassandra would spend the rest of their lives behind bars. A recognition that Brooklyn's death had not been in vain, and that those responsible would be held accountable. But the pain wasn't theirs alone to carry. Brooklyn's friends, the ones who had shared in her laughter, her dreams, and the everyday joys of youth were left grappling with the silence her absence created. No words could ease the ache. No comfort could replace what was lost. All they had were memories, fragments of a life cut short and the hope that her light would live on in their hearts. And then there was her daughter. A little girl far too young to understand the depths of what had been taken from her. A child who would grow up without the warmth of her mother's embrace, without her guidance, her voice, her love. The true weight of the loss will be felt not just today, but in all the tomorrows yet to come. Yet even in the face of such devastation, there are painful but necessary lessons to be learned. Lessons that go far beyond the specifics of this case. First, there is the reminder of how critical it is to recognize signs of emotional and psychological distress in relationships. What started as a toxic relationship between two people spiraled out of control, culminating in the loss of one life and the destruction of many others. Relationships are fragile, and unchecked anger or unresolved issues can lead to devastating consequences. Second, this case serves as a warning about the importance of personal accountability. Keith's actions fueled by suspicion, jealousy, and betrayal were not an isolated incident, nor were they simply the result of a single explosive argument. This was the culmination of a toxic relationship, a string of poor decisions, and a failure to communicate or seek help. The involvement of Cassandra Agee, a mother who should have been a source of support and guidance, only adds to the tragedy. It highlights how a person's influence can either heal or harm, and how, in this case, a mother's complicity in her son's actions only deepened the sorrow. Finally, Brooklyn's death brings the issue of domestic violence and mental health into sharp focus. While the circumstances surrounding Brooklyn's tragic death may be unique, they are not isolated. Many individuals, men and women alike, face abusive, toxic relationships and struggle with emotional pain that they may not know how to process. What happened to Brooklyn can happen anywhere to anyone. It is a reminder that we must work harder as a society to provide resources, support systems, and safe spaces for those who are in need. If you've been moved by Brooklyn's story, or if you've experienced similar struggles in your own life, know that you're not alone. Take the time to reach out, to talk to someone, to seek help. Let's start the conversation so that more lives aren't lost in silence. If you'd like to stay updated on stories like this and support our efforts to shed light on difficult but important issues, be sure to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and leave a comment below to share your thoughts.